So today we're going to be talking about the 2010 movie directed by Martin Scorsese called Shutter Island. So this movie is yet another collaboration between Leo DiCaprio and Martin Scorsese, which follows the movies such as The Gangs of New York, The Aviator, and The Departed. So we start off in the mid-50s in the Boston Harbor Islands, and you see Leo's character, or in this case Teddy Daniels, is getting seasick, and he's trying to pull himself together, and they're headed to this island, and it's an island for the criminally insane, and he's got his good old trusty partner Mark Ruffalo with him, and he's been in quite a few things nowadays. Strange enough, the thing that I saw him in first was this rom com called Just Like Heaven with Reese Witherspoon, and I have another Reese Witherspoon movie I'll be covering soon enough called Legally Blonde. You may have heard of it before. So already you can tell that a lot of this is going to be focused on Teddy Daniels because Mark Ruffalo's character really doesn't have a lot of context to him. They're both deputy marshals and they're trying to figure out this case and pick up this patient as there's a patient missing from the island and they're trying to figure out where she went and how to track her down and to ask her questions and to make sure that everyone else is safe. But there really isn't a lot of emphasis put on Mark Ruffalo's character. Truthfully, I didn't even know that these marshals' names were Teddy and Chuck until about halfway through the movie. It just really hadn't been that important to the context of what was going on. So they get on this island, and you can tell that the atmosphere is very dark. Honestly, it makes dark look light in comparison. But this music plays, which is very ominous and really sets the tone for just how spooky and how unsettling this place is going to be. And it gets a little odd, but you start to notice that these inmates or these patients, whatever you want to call them, it depends on who you're talking to, of course. These people, they act as if they've seen Leo's character before. They don't really do a lot of reacting to Mark Ruffalo's character, though. So that kind of cued my interest. Now, I have to admit, I did see this movie for the very first time in theaters back when it came out in 2010. It was right around that time that I was 17 and 17, 18, and it was one of those, it's a rated R movie, I want to go see this now. And it was a different kind of R movie too, as opposed to a blood and guts slasher kind of thing. This was more on the thriller side of things. So I watched this movie for the very first time in theaters, and that took so much of my effort and patience and attention to really understand what was going on that when I watched this movie for a second time, I picked up some things that I hadn't even, you know, begun to think of beforehand. And just watching this movie for the very first time, you're not going to get all of your questions answered. In fact, there are questions you won't even know that you should be asking until you've seen this movie at least a second time, if not a third time. But this movie is very psychological and it forces you to think hard about what's going on and try to put together all these pieces that they give you. There's a there's a doctor played by Ben Kingsley who ends up providing a lot of information, except he doesn't seem very helpful, and he seems to hide pertinent information from Leo and Mark Ruffalo. And you can see Leo's character start to get angrier and angrier and more furious with the patients and with everyone on this area. And these storms happen and everything is blocked off from ever getting off this island, and you start to wonder, well, why were they trapped here? What was going on? And you really don't know what's going to happen. Though I have to admit, there were a few things that really irritated me throughout this movie. For one thing, Mark Ruffalo's character kept calling Leo's character boss every single time. And it infuriated me to no end. Once you realize what really is going on at the end of this movie, you start to empathize with why this name choice kept happening. It just really got on my nerves that there is no other word besides boss. You couldn't even say partner or pal or buddy or partner in crime. I guess that would be not technically correct. But for real, anything else besides boss? Anything? Okay, fine. I'll get over it sooner or later. The other thing is that this movie really has a lot more of itself set up than it may appear. And this is probably because I watched this movie a second time and I was looking for these different plot points and looking for ways of, oh, this is how the truth is really coming through. This movie has a surprise coincidence or um, commonality with the Silence of the Lambs in the fact that the Buffalo Bill from the Silence of the Lambs, the straight-laced cop from Monk, that's where I first knew him, is the warden of this island, and he's the one who ultimately makes the decision about his patients on this island and what to do with them. Now, one thing about this Teddy Daniels is that he he's not well and he's grieving terribly, and his wife keeps coming up to him in his dreams, and you see her corpse come up as he's hugging her, and you see that he was this veteran, this combat veteran who ended up shooting all of the German soldiers that were holding people in concentration camps, and they just left lots of bodies there to decompose. And how he handled himself was with his liquor, and his wife was not mentally well. And I have to be honest with you, this movie, for me to really talk about this movie, I need to go into spoilers. So there you go. I'm going into spoilers now. So Leo's character is not really Teddy Daniels. It's this guy named Andrew Lattis, and he actually set up this entire elaborate scheme of this missing patient from this Ward C, which is virtually abandoned except for the absolute kooks of the entire bunch, the kookiest of the kooks, if you will. And Mark Ruffalo's character is actually his psychiatrist, even though in this game of Play Along, he's this other deputy marshal with Teddy Daniels. And he ends up disappearing, even though he just makes sure that he vanishes from Leo's sight. That way, Leo doesn't know what's really happened to him and what's really going on with the psychiatrist and what's happening at the lighthouse. And there's this lighthouse, and there's talk about how there's operations done to the brain that cure the criminal instinct. And this is where the movie has some similarities to A Clockwork Orange in the fact that you take these criminals, these people that you would never really let on the streets again, but you give them lobotomies essentially so that they are able to come back to society and be functional human beings. Now, whether or not they're really back to their normal self and really able to make their own decisions is up for debate, but that's the idea of this island. So, one thing that's constantly observed in this movie is Leo's mental state or lack thereof. He's constantly having these dreams about his dead wife, and apparently it was said to be an apartment fire, but what really happened was that she ended up drowning their kids one day, and he was so furious that he ended up murdering her in the process, which, didn't bring his kids back to life, but it brought him some closure in many regards. And this was after he was a war vet as well, and he had shot those people on that line that were guards for the concentration camp at Dachau. And he constantly hears his daughter screaming out to him, "You should have saved us, and you should have been there." And he really cannot let go of this. There's a patient that he comes across in that Ward C, and he had apparently beaten him up in reality. But from what you see in the movie perspective, he's talking with this patient and he's having these interactions, and he keeps asking about this Andrew Lattis. He keeps asking about himself. And the man, the patient behind the bars, keeps telling him that you have to forget your wife, you have to let her go, and if you want to have any chance of being off this island, you have to let her go. And Leo keeps yelling and yelling and yelling, I can't. And I have to admit, I was pretty peeved with him. I was just like, dude, you need to let go. I don't give a fuck if you can't. You need to let go. Just do it. It should not be that hard. Now, of course, you could call me insensitive and, and tell me I should really care more about his feelings. But the reality is, it was just very frustrating just sitting there and watching and knowing that he could get through this, and he was just blocking himself, and so he would not allow himself to be free of his chains. It was just watching someone bury their own pit and then complain about being in that pit. It was one of those things that really just bothered me the most. And what was hard for me to believe was just how elaborate of a hoax he really set up for himself, and how evidently the island let him run the course for 2 days and let him run his fantasies and check out the cemetery on site and climb down the rocks and gorges and go out to the lighthouse and get argumentative and end up beating the bejesus out of the guards on site and blow up someone's car and do all these horrendous things to the people on the island. And it makes you wonder, is he ever going to make it through? And you find out in the end that he's probably not. But you don't know. You don't know officially. But unlike some other movies that have had endings where you just genuinely do not know what is going to happen next, and it's really up for debate, what ends up happening at the end of this movie is that they're not going to lobotomize him if he is able to let go of his past, if he's able to let go of his wife and understand just who everyone really is, that he doesn't have a partner named Chuck, but that he has a psychiatrist named Dr. Sheehan, that's played by Mark Ruffalo, that there is a doctor played by Ben Kingsley who's trying to help him out, and he's the main one that's been trying to vouch for Andrew Lattis, or Leo's character, this entire time. And that he's able to do all these things, and that the warden, played by Buffalo Bill from The Silence of the Lambs, would approve him to continue on with his life and not have to have this treatment that's going to alter his brain. But in the very end, he gets out of there and he goes to Dr. Sheehan and he says, "It's okay, Chuck. We're not going to let them bust us." And you just know he's back to his delusions. He's back to his old ways. All of the things that they tried to get him to do to have him avoid the lobotomy, of whatever you want to call it, it didn't work. And so he's getting carried off, and you don't see him go through the process, but it's implied in this case that he's going to have this procedure performed. So what can you do? And this movie doesn't really demand as much of a sequel as other movies have. You could say that A Clockwork Orange, demanded a sequel. The Dark Knight demanded a sequel. Even The Silence of the Lambs, in its own ways, demanded a sequel, whereas this Shutter Island movie does not. So where does this movie really fit in terms of how I feel about this quest for the best? Well, um, I I think it's um, more of a solid fit than The Silence of the Lambs. And I think the music is really on par. I think the scenery is top notch. I really got sucked into the environment of everything. I really enjoyed all the character interactions, even though, I got a bit frustrated with this lack of being able to let go. But truthfully, it was less frustration at Leo's character and him being aggravated at him, but being aggravated for him, in the sense that I just wanted to see him conquer this litany of demons, having killed many, many, many people, and just having some slim glimmer of hope that he would be able to move forward. And at the end of this movie, he was not able to move forward, and it was unfortunate. Um, in terms of the ranking of the other movies, I I have seen this premise of having the narrator or main character be the one that's psychologically impaired and the events that really happened were not the ones that were on film. Um, but even though I've seen that before, I didn't think the uh, every single point of my grading was on there, but I really only had 1 point off, and it was for the writing. Though I thought the writing was still very solid. Um, I would say that this would be third in my set, under The Dark Knight and under The Clockwork Orange, but above The Silence of the Lambs. And so my next movie is going to be 2001: A Space Odyssey for the quest for the best. And I'm also going to be working on reviews for Legally Blonde, and that's just going to be on my Wacky World of Film. And I'm also going to be starting my Hunt for the Runt finally. And my first movie I'm going to be reviewing is Epic Movie. And let me tell you, it's not that epic. So here you go. Here's the rankings. All right. Y'all have a great day now. I'll talk to y'all later. Bye.